Humans are weird. Cocoon. Inside the Great Barn in the Human Ungulate Reproduction Center on Tau Alpha, the temperature was the regulation standard. Humidity was a bit higher than usual as the filters struggled to pull water out of the air faster than the exterior environment drifted in, but was within safety regulations. Outside, the temperature was marginally greater than the freezing point of pure water, and the humidity had been well over 100% for days. Disrupts the gradient shifted uneasily in the foul-tasting biomass that was a collection of dead fecal matter of hoofed mammals and grassy detritus, and tried to be grateful for the situation. Disrupts the gradient had been warned of the dangers of the environments on this planet. The predators that had greedily eaten nearly a tenth of the initial biomass before Disrupts the Gradient had formulated the correct chemical defense had been entirely expected, and the loss had been factored into the calculations. At least the gathering thought enough calculations had been made. Disrupt the Gradient had never actually lost mass to predation before. At least not on any noticeable level. With original biomass spawned on one of the old colonies, where every defense was already known, travel since on the great transports with thriving healthy ecosystems that regularly merged with other thriving ecosystems, Disrupt the Gradient had never had to deal with wild predators before. The discomfort of being eaten had been far more distracting than anticipated. Then the planet's dry cycle had hit just as the predation was worse. Disrupts the Gradient supposed moving into the humans' offered refuge then would have been wise, but certainly that the problems would be solved as soon as the wet season came had delayed reaction. Of course, the dehydration had been solved. The rain had brought a local fungal growth that had nearly starved the gathering out, and had lowered mental capacity to nearly unacceptable levels. If the local human hadn't had a solid understanding of fungal growth patterns, Disrupts the Gradient might have been in serious trouble. But she had, and she had insisted on moving the gathering's primary mass under the horribly sterile-tasting, but elevated and sheltered soil of her main barn before the rains hit really bad, as she called it. Disrupts the Gradients pulled mass a little closer to center as thought threads crept through sopping memories of the time. The gathering hadn't wanted to creep under the foul-tasting barn, but had had just enough mental power left to be polite, and had moved in enough central mass, leaving the rest, almost half, in the desiccated but sweet-tasting grasslands. Then the flood had come, and the safe mass had felt that in the grasslands being torn to shreds. Disrupts the Gradient had managed to salvage a good bit of the mass and pull it into the half under the welcome safety of the artificial high ground and the equally artificial chemical composition of the barn, but had lost a lot of mass nonetheless. The door opened, interrupting pondering, and two young humans tramped in, carrying waterproof bags full of heavy items. They were muttering eagerly to each other and seemed to have entirely forgotten the gathering's presence as they walked over to the dry biomatter storage piles and began rearranging the straw, Disrupts the Gradient believed it was called. They created what was clearly a resting depression and spread several blankets over it. Then they positioned a light projector over and behind the place, stacking several woody fiber books beside them, tucked a thermal storage container down in the straw with several cups, and then proceeded to burrow down into the comfortable pile they had made. Disrupts the Gradient was suddenly deeply curious for the first time in weeks. These were young humans, full of animal life and energy. Their personal favorite activity, this memory remained at least, a logical one to store near their home, of course, was simply running, not for any purpose or vector goal, just going out into the wild flatlands that surrounded their spawn point and forcing their motile fibers to propel them at fantastic speeds along the surface. Their second favorite activity was finding any body of water deep enough to encompass their mass and move as fast as they could through it. It was true that, like all such creatures, they had to pay for their energy expenditure with a diurnal rest cycle, but it was currently what the humans called a noon, the peak of their activity cycle. What were two healthy young humans doing composting at high noon? A projected entertainment began to play across the wall. At least, Disrupts the Gradient assumed it was one. Animal light projections were so difficult to process, even before suffering the mass loss. However, the artificial voices and music coming from the speaker was just recognizable. The two humans seemed to be paying little attention to it, focusing more on the wood fiber and mineral spread data storage they had brought with them, and occasionally reaching out to take in small amounts of the heated liquid in their thermal storage cylinders. Disrupts the Gradient grew more curious over their behavior and gave the center of mass a rustle. That didn't seem to get their attention, so the gathering made the effort to mound up and flex some sound-producing fibers. The humans emitted a collective squawk and thrashed around a bit before sitting up and fixing their eyes on the largest mass pile they could see. "Squeak! Disrupts the Gradient!" the older of the two exclaimed. "I forgot you were in here." "We're not disturbing you, are we?" the younger one asked. "We can leave if you like."
"Not disturbing me," Disrupts the Gradient assured them. "Have questions?"
The two siblings, the gathering thought their relationship was called that, glanced at each other and grinned. Disrupts the Gradient vaguely recalled knowing more about them before the floods. "Ask away," the older one said.
"Why here?"
Disrupts the Gradient asked. Forming words with damaged tendrils was painful, but the more they were used now, the faster they would regenerate. "We're here because it's music lesson time in there," the younger sibling said, pointing towards the main house. "I love music now, but 10 cousins learning the recorder on mass-printed pipes?" The human shuddered dramatically. "It's torture," the older human said with a dramatic flourish of long hair. "We escaped out here."
"Why not move?"
Disrupts the Gradient asked. The two frowned at the communication mass and then at each other. "Do you mean, why don't we go live somewhere else?" one asked.
"No,"
Disrupts the Gradient replied and tightened sound-producing tendrils. "Why not go out and play?" They stared at the communications mass without making any sounds for several long, drawn-out moments before the older one emitted a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh. It's 34 degrees and pouring rain," the older human said. "That's the worst weather known to humanity," the younger one added. "The worst," agreed the older. "There's nothing you can do when it's that cold and wet."
"Playin' colder?"
Disrupts the Gradient pointed out. "We play in snow," the older one said. "That's different."
"Playin' cold water up north?"
Disrupts the Gradient tried again. "The water was cold, yeah," the younger said, "but we had wetsuits and stuff, and the air was nice and warm then." "Humans just don't do 34 and pouring rain," the older one said. "Too warm to freeze the water, but so cold that getting wet hurts." "Nope," the younger human said, shaking a scruffy head. "Nothing to do on a day like today but hole up with a good book." Appearing to think that this sufficient explanation, the two burrowed back down into their nests and resumed composting their data. Disrupts the Gradient also relaxed from the more alert state and pondered what had been told. It made no sense at the moment, but hopefully it would once enough mass had regrown. Humans Are Weird, I Did the Math, available on Indiegogo, February and March of 2026. If you want more absurd humans and befuddled aliens, get your copy now!